So hello, I'm Sally Goble, and I'm the head of quality at The Guardian. And I run the QA team, formerly known as the testing team, and we're about 9 people in our team altogether. If you don't know what The Guardian is, it was a newspaper originally. It's a news website. We have about 9 million visitors a day, about 25 million page views on average a day. Native mobile apps, a public content API, and editorial tools that are custom-made in-house that allow our journalists to write their stories. I've been there for 6 years, and I've kind of been witness to a kind of transformation in the way we kind of develop and release our software from one that was kind of pretty ordinary and staid to somewhere where we release our software to the public multiple times a day. So I wanted to kind of tell you, give you an overview of our processes and how they've changed over the last 6 years, and kind of talk really about what that means to the test team, the team formerly known as the test team, I might say. I'm not an engineer. I'm not going to go into kind of technical details about the kind of implementation of the things that we've done. I'm kind of going to give you an overview of how things have changed. The reason I wanted to do this talk today was because there was this kind of industry round table event for kind of QAs and heads of QA a few months ago. We were all kind of sitting around, and we were basically being given a talk by a kind of a vendor of QA services, internationally known, very well respected company, and they were kind of to sell their services. And they were kind of sitting there and they said, you know, companies like Amazon and Etsy, they can manage to do continuous delivery and rapid deployment several times a day because they have test automation. And that's really the kind of the key driver that allows them to release multiple times a day. And I kind of sat there and I thought, huh? Really? Because in my experience, completely the opposite is the case. That the fact that we deploy and release our software multiple times a day means we really do very, very little test automation and testing at all. We've adopted a really, really light touch approach to testing at The Guardian. And so the aim of my talk is to kind of persuade you that the kind of fetishization of automation tests as a magic bullet that will kind of allow you to deliver software quickly is wrong, and that the opposite is the case. So now, when I say this to people, it kind of provokes a bit of a reaction. And kind of most people say, are you crazy? What do you mean you don't do testing? And then they say, don't you care about the quality of your products? And they say, what are the risks to this approach? And then they finally say, what do you do if you don't do testing? So I'm going to look at these questions and try and answer them for you. And maybe at the end of the talk, I can try and persuade you around to my way of thinking. So the first question, huh? Are you crazy? Well, I'd like to say that we kind of planned it all out, but actually we kind of ended up in this position as a consequence of the other stuff that we were doing. I'm going to kind of paint you a picture of what it was like at The Guardian 6 years ago when I first started. Okay, so set the scene. Front end of our website was tightly coupled to our editorial tools, which meant every release we did meant that we had to take our editorial tools down and nobody could publish anything. Our deploy process took a web operations person half an hour to do it as a manual process, and we couldn't roll back anything we did. So this meant when we needed to release our software, we'd go into this kind of massive process, okay? So we had a 2-week release cycle, and we'd kind of roll up a whole bunch of features, throw in a few bug fixes, get it all together. We'd create a release candidate. We'd deploy that onto a staging environment, and then we'd start testing, manual testing, 6 years ago. Start manual testing. We had 2 people, spent 2 days manually testing everything in that kind of release candidate. We'd had a code freeze as well, of course. Manually testing, so we'd have 100 pages, representative pages from our website. We'd test we'd meticulously compare the ones on production to the ones on our staging environment, every element on every page. And we'd test all of our editorial tools as well. And then, of course, if we found any bugs in those in our release candidate, we'd kind of raise some bug reports. We'd put them in our bug tracking system. We'd give it all back to the developers. They'd fix them. We'd have another code freeze. We'd have another release onto our staging environment, and we'd test it all again. Then we'd have something that was ready to deploy to production. Yay! Then the machine that was deployment would kind of kick into kind of play. Okay. So we'd have to schedule our releases 8 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. This kind of sounds remarkably similar to the IG talk from earlier. We'd have to deploy at 8 o'clock on a Wednesday morning because of the editorial tools, right? So we'd go into work. We'd have a front-end dev, a back-end dev, a release manager, operations person, QA, somebody from editorial, all sitting there ready to do our deploy. Now, God help us if there was a test match on in Sri Lanka, or a famous person had died that day, or there was a vote in the House of Commons. We couldn't take our tools down because we needed to publish. So we'd have to reschedule at the last minute our release to the following week. All of this meant that it was really, really important that we did that kind of massive regression cycle of testing, because we could never ship any bugs into production. Because if we did, we couldn't roll back. We'd have to wait for another slot to deploy the software. So we had to make sure that everything was pixel perfect, right? So we did. And then we kind of realized that this wasn't the ideal way of working, okay? So we kind of came upon a plan to fix this process. And when we looked at it, we thought, okay, we can kind of speed up our deployment process over here. But it doesn't matter how much quicker we make our deployment process over here. We're still going to have these 2 days of manual regression that are going to kind of make a bottleneck for our deploy to production. So what we have to do logically is automate our regression tests. So that's what we did. We hired a consultant who knew about Selenium, come into the office. We took 2 people from our team and sat them down with them from the QA team, took them off the products they were working on, and sat them down and tasked them with automating our regression tests. They sat and they wrote tests, and they wrote tests, and they wrote more tests. And after a year, they had all of the tests written. But you know what? The tests were rubbish. The tests failed. The tests failed to find any issues. The tests were flaky. The tests were having to be refactored all the time because the code was changing all the time. Everybody hated the tests, apart from the 3 people who were working on them. But several things were happening in tandem with this kind of year spent writing out automated tests. At the same time as that happening, we'd managed to decouple our editorial tools from our front end of our website so we could deploy whenever we wanted to. And we also had created our in-house deployment tool, which meant that anybody in the building could deploy at leisure to our production environment. And so that was happening, and we could deploy quickly, and more importantly than that, we could roll back. And then we looked at our automated tests that everybody hated. We looked at our kind of fast release and deployment process over here, and we just thought, do you know what? Let's just kill the tests. And that's what we did. We killed the tests. We had this great deploy process. We could deploy multiple times a day. I love this. It's, what does that say? 343 deploys on that particular day, which is where we are now. So we decided that we were going to kill all of our tests, and we were going to just be a company that could fix things quickly if they did break. So we threw all away our tests and decided to look more tangentially how we could kind of refine the whole process. When I was telling somebody about this the other day, they said, "Don't you care?" They were like, "That picture you painted to us of those testers sitting there meticulously checking this page against this page, hundreds of pages, 32 man-hours of testing, that sounds like a company that really cared about their product. do you just not care anymore about what you're doing? And in fact, kind of the opposite is the case now. We care more about what we're doing. I think it's a bit like this, and Wouter alluded to this as well the other day, earlier on, is you take away the safety net of your testing and everybody starts to care more. And kind of more than that, when you have this process of kind of a large suite of regression, either manual or automated tests, and there's a team whose sole function it is to do the testing, and you have to have a team of people who do the testing because it's just such a massive thing, then they're really the only people who care about it. And everybody else is just like, yep, throw it over the wall, they'll take care of it. Nobody else cares. But what we really wanted to do is make everybody care about the quality of our products and kind of the right people do the testing in the right place. So I'm not saying we don't have any tests at all, but we have a very, very light touch to testing. And the people who do the testing are the appropriate people for that time. So it might be a developer writing unit tests. It might be a product owner or a designer doing some UAT testing on a product. It might be an automation test written by somebody that runs in production. But or it might be our alpha and beta program users doing the testing for us. But we very much have a very, very light touch to that. So everybody cares more about the quality of our products, even though we do much less testing. So what are the risks? Isn't it risky not to test stuff? Gonna have a bit of water. If you do this, create air traffic control systems, or make the software for self-driving cars, or multi-million pounds of transactions a day, then probably the no testing or the low amount of testing approach is not one for you. But for everybody else, I think you should give it a go. That's not where I want to be. I've got a little example here, which is kind of quite pertinent, because we're the Guardian. Yesterday's news, this is a newspaper, you've seen one before. Yesterday's news was really important. And at 7 o'clock in the morning, we sent out some updates to our website. Now, those updates were kind of fairly sketchy. And then at 9 o'clock, there were more updates of what was going on. And then at 11 o'clock, there were more updates of what was going on. Now, you could choose to have this version of your news being delivered or your software being delivered, whereby you kind of get what you're given and it's iterated on. Or you can kind of not get that news at any point in that day and get it the following day in a newspaper where it's been... I'm not saying the news that you received yesterday wouldn't have been checked. I'm not saying we just bung it all out. I'm saying we can kind of iterate over the process. Or you can get it today in its kind of fully featured, finished form, but you have to wait a day later to get it. What we want to do is kind of instill a culture where we're kind of not wrong long, basically, where the kind of risk of us delivering our software quickly to our users is kind of greater than the risk of introducing a bug into production. Now, there's a kind of a toolbox that you can use of things to mitigate that risk. You can deploy, or they've spoken about today fairly frequently. You can deploy changes discreetly. There's no point in bundling up a whole bunch of features and pushing them out the door to production when if something does go wrong, you have to kind of trace back to the feature that broke that. We deploy all of our changes discreetly, which is why you'll have seen 343 changes going out the door in a day. We implement feature switching all the time, which not only means that we can turn features off if they break, but it also means that we can turn them off if they're no longer creating any value for us. And we also do a lot of canary releases for risky features. So when we migrated 2 years ago from guardian.co.uk over to the guardian.com domain, it was a massively risky project. And what we chose to do in that circumstance was to release to our Australian audience first. And then when we were happy with that, we released to our American audience. And then finally, when we were happy there was no risk involved in those changes, we rolled it out globally to the rest of our audience. Of course, monitoring is very important, but I would say don't monitor and alert on everything, because you won't be able to see the wood for the trees when things do break. So we're kind of very, very careful about what we monitor and what we alert on. And for when that's not always appropriate for us, so we have parts of our site which are low traffic. So our e-commerce section of our site, sadly, is low traffic. Then monitoring is not your kind of most useful tool, because you may deploy to production now and not have anything happen for a good amount of time. So in those circumstances, we do have automated tests. Actually, we have one automated test that runs in production on every deploy. And a kind of key to this is it's fed back to the developers on deploy the state of the result of that test. So kind of very, very fast feedback. Another thing in that toolbox is our CDN, which we originally implemented to make serving our website quicker to our international users, but also has the kind of added bonus of if we do have a problem with a website, then we can serve stale and serve cached content while we fix it. That's always a good thing. And we have beta programs which we run on our website, but also on our apps as well, so we can trial things before they ever hit production. So we'd rather spend time and put time and energy into kind of creating alpha and beta programs than we would getting other people to test things than we would do ourselves. So what do you do if you don't do testing? That's an option. And to be honest, that was a kind of something that occurred to me 2 years ago or 3 years ago when we said, do you know what, we don't need all this testing. We kind of thought, what are we going to do? You can kind of have an existential crisis, or you can kind of look somewhere else for a conventional role, or you can think, what do we do now? Let's throw away the rule book. Let's stop thinking about testing as a function of a team and start thinking of it as a kind of small subset of the things you might do to improve the quality of your product. And so that's what we do. We kind of focus much more on what quality means for our products than what testing does. So we kind of have this thing that happens which I find quite amusing, when people come and join the team, the QA team, they come up to me on their first day and they say, what shall I do? And I say, I don't know, figure it out. And that's the way we work. We try and figure out what is the kind of quality of our products, and then we try and improve it. And this kind of means that you can be doing all sorts of interesting things that don't involve testing. I'll skip by that one. So, for example, on our website, we kind of wanted to improve the quality of what we're doing. We no longer sit there and kind of check the pages in staging. We don't have a staging environment on our website. Just push things out in production. We decided that if we were going to encourage everybody to do kind of lightweight testing, we needed to kind of be really clear and really specific about where we were testing. Now, we had the kind of stats buried in our kind of analytics tool about what users and how users were accessing our website and what devices and what browsers, but they were so buried that nobody ever looked at them and nobody ever paid any attention to them. So one of the things that the quality team did was extract that data from buried in our analytics tool and kind of expose it on a quality dashboard, so that if anybody did want to do a bit of lightweight testing, anybody in the team, from our products to our developers who do their own kind of smoke testing before things go out the door, that they could have a look and they'd know where they needed to test it. But that's not enough, really, is it? Because kind of testing's pretty boring, generally. We decided to make it fun for people to test our website. So we created the Lego device wall of awesomeness. That meant that people didn't have to sit there with multiple devices trying and testing things on them one at a time, that they could have fun testing on multiple devices as they went along. Now, these are kind of pretty obvious things, I guess. But there are things involved in quality from our website where we'd never have found with testing, neither manual nor automation nor smoke testing, I guess, that kind of really are get to the key to what quality means for us. So we have these things called live blogs on The Guardian, which are articles which are written, which kind of cover ongoing events. They're kind of rolling articles that are updated every few minutes, and they can kind of get really content rich. So there are lots of embeds in them, and they started kind of crashing people's browsers and people's pages when there was a kind of a heavy news day. But not only did they start crashing people's pages, but people started complaining that the kind of data plans were being kind of crucified because a lot of our users are in America. They're kind of on kind of low data plans, and that the live blogs were just too kind of data heavy for them to appreciate us inflicting them upon them. So what we did was we created a tool that kind of polled our API, that looked at all of the day's live blogs, and that kind of did a report for our editorial team on how much data was being downloaded and what the cost. I think in there's kind of a cost per page of what they're going to cost our American audiences. And then what they do is they alert the editorial team if they go over a certain threshold, and get the editorial team to take evasive action and kind of stop that live blog and start a new one, or kind of take some of the tweets and embedded videos out of them. So kind of a really good way that the quality team have started adding quality to our product without actually testing. Another thing we did, so it kind of all makes sense, doesn't it, on a website? Oh, you can kind of deploy it quickly, you can fix it quickly. It sounds easy, but then we kind of had another issue when it came to our apps. Now, if you've ever been a dev on an iOS app, you know that the problem with iOS is that you can't have this same model. When you're kind of working on it, it seems to be going back to the dark ages. You can only release every 2 weeks because Apple have this kind of submission and review process, which means that it's very difficult to kind of do anything quickly. I guess we kind of could have said, oh, well, you know, this approach to kind of lightweight testing works on our website, but it's not going to work on our iOS apps because we're back in kind of the dark ages. But we decided not to take that approach to our iOS apps. We decided to try and adopt the same approach to lightweight testing. Now, I'm not saying we don't do any testing on our iOS apps. We do. But what we decided to do instead was create a very kind of engaged audience around an internal alpha program and an external beta program, so that we release our software to them, to our alpha program nightly, and to our beta program several times before the software hits the general public and the App Store, so that we can kind of get very good feedback on the problems that we might have in our app, and also the features we might have in our app before they go out. Now, that's kind of a difficult thing to manage when you kind of have several thousand users submitting their feedback, and all in various stages of your beta program. So kind of, again, we created a dashboard that exposed to our developers and our team the state of all the users in our alpha and beta program. Now, when you have an alpha and a beta program and you solicit feedback from your users, you have then the problem of managing that data, which is kind of an ongoing thing for us now. So one of the kind of tasks for us for the next few months is to try and kind of, should be told to stop now. I missed the 5 minute and the 10 minutes. Yeah, no, that's fine. Is to kind of programmatically deal with that feedback that we're getting. And I'm in conclusion. In conclusion, don't follow the plan. Don't believe that one thing fits all. Be more creative with what you're doing, and don't fetishize automation testing. Thank you.